Dear learners, I'm Christina Georgy, your academic counselor for the BEGC program. I welcome you to my session. Today we will focus our attention towards modernist poetry with specific focus on W.B.Yeasts. So before we move further, let me clarify that this is a specialized session specifically designed for the BEGC third year learners. Hence, all the aspects discussed in this session will be solely based on or limited to the prescribed study material or syllabus for the same. So let me once again remind you that we are studying the course code BEGC-112, which is titled British Literature Early 20th Century. So within this particular course code, today we will focus our attention towards block 4 and the first unit of block 4. That is unit 13 of block 4, which is titled W.B.Yeasts, the second coming. Remember, we will be focusing our attention towards the specific text prescribed for detailed study, that is the poem, the second coming. Dear learners, keep in mind that we have already discussed the aspects related to modernist poetry, and it will be within the context of modernist poetry that we will be discussing today's topic. So when you speak about W.B.Yeasts, you need to know that he was one of the greatest English language poets. That is, he is undoubtedly a towering figure in 20th century English literature. So when you answer your questions with respect to your TEE, make sure that you make some references that would actually make this poet stand out in the history of English language and literature. These sentences could actually help you. And we studied T.S. Eliot. We know that T.S. Eliot, W.B.Yeasts and others are quintessential figures in modernist poetry. And like Eliot was also a dramatist, here W.B.Yeasts was also a dramatist, and he is also a renowned writer of prose. What do you mean by prose? Prose means it could be short story, novels or other aspects without rhyme and rhythm. And if such writings have rhyme and rhythm, we can categorize them as poetry. So, one of the most remarkable aspects regarding W.B.Yeasts is that he has won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1923. So, that is an important aspect. Make sure that you remember that he has received the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1923. And yes, he was born in the year 1865 and he began writing at the early age of 17. And regarding his early publications, we need to make sure that we know certain influences that he had. For example, if you know the romantic poet Shelley, he used to be a prominent influence on W.B.Yeasts. In the sense, he used to read the works and theories of Shelley and he must have been influenced by them. Similarly, Edmund Spenser was also a notable influence on W.B.Yeasts. So we can understand all these aspects from the early publications of W.B.Yeasts. For example, the first published poem, The Isle of Statues. Yes, this work revealed the influences of Shelley and Spenser. And the poets who influenced Yeats are not just limited to these two. These influences were diverse and include the English romantic poets such as Wordsworth, Blake and Keats and some others. Remember, romanticism, when we think of romanticism, it's Wordsworth and Coleridge that comes to our mind. And there are a few new or second generation of romantics, and one such notable figure include Keats. And there were also some French symbolist writers who used to influence the writings of W.B.Yeasts. That is Stephen Mallarmé and Arthur Rimbaud. See, very often when I teach you the life and works of a particular author mentioned in our study material, I tell you to have a brief overview. Very often we make use of these biographical elements just to fill in the introductory paragraph of our essay question. But here with respect to W.B.Yeasts, make sure that you study his life and works, for you could even receive a specific question based on these aspects. So his influences, we are speaking about the influences, he was also influenced by Irish mythology and folklore. The main reason is that he was born in Ireland. Did you know that he was born in Ireland? One common mistake that I find with most of our students is that as we are studying British literature, they tend to write that W.B. Yeats is an English poet. Of course, he used to write in English, but he was born in Ireland, and as a consequence, most of his influences were based on Irish mythology, folklore, especially during his initial formative years of work. So there are some notable poems such as The Wanderings of Oisin and other poems published in 1869, which stand proof to these influences. And undoubtedly we can say that W.B. Yeats was an Irish patriot who desired Ireland's political independence from England. That is, Ireland is also a colonized country. Just like we in India used to be colonized by the British colonizers, Ireland used to be the colonized nation under England. And many of his works are in praise of Irish culture and heritage. So this is something that you need to keep in mind too. Irish nationalism and W.B. Yeats. There could be a short question. Alright. I've also taken a separate session on W.B. Yeats for another batch. If anybody is interested, and I'll share that with you. So in the year 1889, something very significant happened in the life of W.B. Yeats. Interestingly, he met his lady love. So you must have heard of Maud Gonne. If not, please be aware that Maud Gonne used to be the love interest of W.B. Yeats. So she was an Irish nationalist and was undoubtedly the great love of his life. It was mainly Maud Gonne's influence that made him get involved in Irish politics and propelled him to join the Irish Republican Brotherhood. So, as an influence of Maud Gonne, he gradually entered into Irish politics. So, though Maud Gonne never consented to marry him, she was the muse who inspired him to write many poems and plays for her. Unfortunately, his love could not be fulfilled because Maud Gonne refused to get married to him and she married another person. If I remember it right, she married MacBride. But the marriage didn't last for many years, and gradually after 2 years or so they divorced, and Yeats was sad about this aspect too. Surprisingly, Yeats was happily married to another lady in the future. So we can say that W.B. Yeats was passionate about Irish cultural identity and Irish heritage, which was in line with Maud Gonne's struggle for political independence for her nation. So let's quickly go through some of the most renowned poems written by W.B. Yeats. Firstly, The Stolen Child, The Second Coming, The Lake Isle of Infree, Sailing to Byzantium, among others. See, one of the most celebrated poems by W.B. Yeats is Easter 1916. There is also September 1913. It's up to you to study the names of a few of the poems. Nevertheless, you need to have clear-cut clarity regarding the Second Coming, which is the poem prescribed for detailed study in our study material. The most important poems would be Sailing to Byzantium, Easter 1916, and the text that we are about to study, The Second Coming. With respect to the Second Coming, you may also be prepared with the year of publication. Before we move on to this text, The Second Coming as such, let's discuss a few more aspects relating to the works and the life of W.B. Yeats in general. So we mentioned Maud Gonne. It was not just Maud Gonne in the life of Yeats. That is, he had another friend who was also his patron. Her name was Lady Gregory. So it was along with Lady Gregory that he founded the Irish Literary Theatre. The purpose of founding this theatre was to revive Celtic dramatic literature. And remember, he wrote around 26 plays. and he was more or less a cultural revolutionary. And you must have heard about J.M. Synge. I'm not sure whether you have studied this, but along with Synge, Yeats established the famous Abbey Theatre, one of the leading cultural institutions of Ireland. If you could study the motto of the Abbey Theatre, that is, bring upon stage the deeper emotions of Ireland. So these were all part of Irish national movement, and Yeats was undoubtedly a pillar of the Irish literary establishment, and we can say that this Abbey Theatre that he founded continues to play a vital role in launching new young Irish writers and playwrights. So these aspects are very important. Make sure that you prepare this. Either a short question would be there, or else you could make use of all these as part of your introductory paragraphs with respect to the essay answer that you might write with respect to the second coming. So if you look at your study material under section 13.2, the famous lines of W.B. Yeats are given. There you see that Yeats' truly celebrated status can be best seen in some of the famous lines he wrote, and such lines stand testimony to the romantic and humane aspects of Yeats' mind. You may have a look into those lines. You don't have to by heart them, for it would be great for you to be familiar with the text that you are studying, that is the second coming. Remember, there could be annotation questions too. We have discussed the previous question paper, December 2022 question paper, in detail. Moving on to the historical and the biblical contexts associated with this particular work. See, we already discussed, but we'll have more clarity when we discuss the aspects mentioned in our study material. There could be questions from this part, that is, they could ask you a specific question, or as part of the essay you will have to mention these historical and biblical contexts. So Yeats' genius is seen in his fusion of historical and biblical contexts in a single poem, The Second Coming. So as we know, this poem is based on the book of Revelation, which is the last book of the Holy Bible. In Malayalam we say Velipadu Pustakam. Yeah. The title of the poem, The Second Coming, is a phrase out of the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation, also variedly called the Apocalypse of John, Revelation to John, or Revelation from Jesus Christ, is the final book of the New Testament, and consequently is also the final book of the Christian Bible. So these are aspects that we already know, and they've also given you a short overview of the Holy Bible. It is mentioned that the Bible is of two parts, the Old Testament and the New Testament. The book of Revelation is the last book we know. The word apocalypse means unveiling or revelation. It occupies a central place in Christianity, and we have evidence of the second coming of Jesus in the Gospels. So Gospels written by Matthew, Mark, Luke and John testify the same. And this is also seen in the book of Revelation and other. So in Christianity, second coming refers to the future return of Christ in glory, when it is understood that he will step up his kingdom, judge his enemies and reward the faithful, that is living and dead. So John in his Gospels, John in his Gospel says that he received new revelation concerning the return of the Lord Jesus Christ. And in the book of Revelation, chapter 1, line 18, the figure whom Jesus sees identifies himself as the first and the last, who was dead, and behold, I am alive forever and ever, a reference to the resurrection of Jesus. You don't have to mention all these details, nevertheless you need to know an idea mentioned in your textbook, for they might ask you a specific question on the historical and the biblical contexts. So the key literary influence running through this poem from start to finish is the biblical book of Revelation. In this book of Revelation, Jesus is predicted to return to the earth. That is what is called the second coming, and usher in a new era of peace, joy, and union with God. We discussed all these aspects. So this poem is kind of a subversion of that story. Anyway, seeing a bizarre beast in place of the expected savior. That is, who's the bizarre beast? It has references to historical context. We'll discuss that. So moving on to the historical context, that is, this particular poem was published a year after the end of World War I. That is, we know that World War I started in the year 1914 and ended in 1918. And this poem, as we studied, was written in the year 1919, a year after the end of World War I. So the historical period is quite clear to us and significant, even though Yeats does not make any explicit reference to it. The fallout of the war was the death of nearly 20 million people, while another 20 million were injured. So the first few lines of the poem, starting from the third line, sums up this aspect. Things fall apart, those lines. So this phrase, things fall apart, is also a title of another written by Chinua Achebe. This short story we are studying as part of our course code BEGC-112. So if we closely look at those lines, we understand that these lines detail the devastations caused by the war, and the last two lines in particular is almost a foretelling of the Second World War. That is, almost prophesying the coming of the worst, like Adolf Hitler, full of passionate intensity. So the bizarre beast that is mentioned may be a reference to Adolf Hitler. So though Yeats is no prophet or foreseer, his words anticipate the deadly fascist violence that Hitler unleashed 2 decades later, leading to World War II. So the World War II timeline, 1939 to 1945. So here we see that Yeats juxtaposes the historical context of the First World War that he is presently concerned with an end of the world scenario. Such a compare and contrast is happening, which transforms the work partly to a work of eschatology, that is, writing about the apocalypse. That is, this word relates to writing about the apocalypse. So the biblical revelation had foretold the futuristic happening of a degenerate world speedily coming to an end. Therefore, this poem has both the historical context woven around the biblical narrative of the birth and crucifixion of Jesus and his resurrection that holds the promise of his possible second coming to save mankind. So that's all regarding the biblical and historical aspects, quite important. And now that I remember, let me mention that while you prepare for your TE, make sure that you read the questions given right after the end of every single unit. Unit end questions. With respect to this particular poem, this chapter, this unit, section 13.9 gives you unit end questions. If you are lucky, as you don't have many prior question papers to refer to, there could be questions from unit end questions. I could figure out that even for the past TE, there were questions from unit end questions, and still students used to wonder from where the question was asked. So if you are prepared with the unit end questions, it would be much easier for you. Am I clear so far?